Morning everyone, Flightsimguy here. I am in Captain Sim 767 and it's times like this, makes you wish that the add-on vendors would coordinate when they release their products, because it looks right here and everything looks good on the outside, but when you actually get on the inside, oh, that looks good. When you get on the inside, you see this. But anyhow, I'm getting off topic. Have you ever boarded an airplane? And when I board an airplane, the first thing I do when I come in, when I walk through here, before I make my way down to the cabin, the first thing I do is I turn my head to the left and see if I can get a peek of the cockpit. Now, in this case, I can't peek in the cockpit because it's kind of hard to see. But for the longest while, I'd peek in the cockpit and I'd get a glimpse of this device right here. This chair is in the way, but let's see if I can go in a little bit closer. I'm actually moving myself in the cockpit with the camera views. Normally I do this with Easy Dock, but Easy Dock wasn't working in FSX box for me. Anyway, I'd always get a glimpse into the cockpit and I'd always see those two computers just sitting there, and for the longest while I didn't know what those computers were. So I figured, now that I know, I'll do a video, or a quick video on the flight management computer and how it has revolutionized aviation. Anyway, so that's the first part. Let's get back to the slideshow. Good morning, YouTube. My name is Flightsimguy, and today I'm going to go over my half-assed guide to the flight management computer. Now, in that introduction video clip that you saw, I'm pretty sure a lot of people do like what I said I was doing with regards to boarding the plane, looking to the left, checking out the cockpit, and like, ooh, what is that thing right there? So after this video, you should understand what the flight management computer is and how it applies to modern aviation. Alright, so what is a flight management computer? The flight management computer is actually a component of a larger system, which is a flight management system, which also includes the autopilot. When you go into an aircraft, what you're actually seeing is a CDU. That's this thing right here. Day to day, and for the rest of this presentation, FMS and FMC, flight management system, flight management computer, they're largely used interchangeably. And what they're referring to is what we're seeing right here. Now, I realize I haven't answered the question. Now, to fully understand the FMC, we need to go back in time a little bit. See, back in the day, the cockpit was a little bit more crowded than it is today. In addition to the pilot and the co-pilot, there was also this guy, and he's called the flight engineer. The flight engineer's job was actually pretty important. He did a crap ton of stuff. He had to monitor all sorts of systems, make calculations, constantly providing information to the pilot, V-speeds and whatnot. Flight engineer, very, very important. And typically the flight engineer was a fully qualified pilot. Well, before I move on to the next person in the cockpit, I figured I'd include this shot. This is the flight engineer station of the CONCORD. It's like, what the hell? Like a million knobs and buttons. And I want to say the CONCORD went out of production in the early 2000s after it crashed. Air France and I think British Airways were the only ones that flew it, and they were heavily subsidized by the government because they were just simply too expensive to operate. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think the Concords were ever updated with a FMC. I want to say they had navigators and flight engineers up until the end. And the next person in the cockpit is the navigator. Now the navigator, his job essentially is to navigate. Tracking the aircraft's position, and for the most part making sure they didn't get lost. As with many jobs, the computer rendered the flight engineer and the navigator obsolete. interesting point on the navigator. I want to say the Air Force still have navigators in their B-52s. That might have changed with the latest upgrades of avionics, but when I was in the Air Force, they still had the navigator and they still had to, do old school navigating. A computer made the flight engineer and the navigator's job obsolete. So that's the flight management computer. Now, how does it really integrate with all this stuff? The FMC started showing up in cockpits back in the mid to late 70s, and it has in addition to being able to compute and do a lot of number crunching, it had memory, because by then in the 70s, miniaturization, semiconductors, computers actually got small enough and they had enough memory that it could store an awful lot of information. And it was also integrated in the back end with the various aircraft systems. So what we have was this flight management computer. It was integrated with the INS from a navigating perspective. It was integrated with the guidance panel or the autopilot, and it was also loaded with a ton of information. And to give you an idea how much information that was, let's go over to here. This is skyvector.com. I have World High turned on, and what we're looking at is all the jetways and all the VOR stations and all the NDBs and all the airports. All of this stuff was loaded in the earliest flight management computers. Now I know I've given you a lot of information, but you're still wondering, what's the FMC and how does it work? Well, I'm getting to that. So the flight management computer, essentially it's a special purpose computer designed to help fly the plane. And when programmed, the FMC is perfectly capable of flying an aircraft from its destination all the way down to landing, assuming that airport or that runway has an ILS that supports auto landing. At the beginning of the flight, the pilots programmed the FMC with a ton of information, such as where they're leaving from, where they're going to, the airplane weight, number of passengers, cargo weight, weather properties, wind speed, direction, fuel on board. Most importantly, the flight path. That's the route or the list of waypoints from the departure point to the destination. They also include our punch-in flight altitudes, altitude restrictions, speed restrictions, and as time warrants, while they're in flight, you can enter in holds, you can enter in missed approaches, you can enter in stars, SIDS, you can enter a lot of stuff. It's a computer and you can quote-unquote program it. And once it's set up properly, it can fly the plane all by itself. Now remember, the FMC is a computer, and if you've ever taken basic computer courses in high school or college, you know that you can save stuff off. Well, one of the cool things with the flight management computer is you can actually save the route. And if you're an airline and you fly the same route over and over, you just save the route, and whenever you have to fly it over, you just pull it up. And it makes programming the flight management computer a lot easier. So how does it work? Well, on a day-to-day basis, and looking at this plane, just taking a quick look, I can tell that is a 777. Anyhow, getting off course. The pilot, shortly after takeoff, turns on the autopilot, and the pilot can control the airplane using the autopilot. This usually occurs, I don't know, a minute and a half after taking off, when the pilot takes off from the runway and enters into the SID, or the departure procedures. And after he's leaving the airport area, getting his way up to the jetways into cruise climb, the pilot turns over control from himself to the flight management computer, and the flight management computer controls the autopilot, which controls the airplane. And it's as simple as that. Once the pilot workload reduces during the climb to cruising altitude, the pilot transfers control of the autopilot to the flight management computer. The flight management computer controls the autopilot, which controls the airplane. And it's as simple as that. Some final thoughts. Modern commercial jets are designed to be flown by the flight management computer. You can hand fly a 767 or a 757 or a 747 or 737. You can hand fly the plane as needed, but the truth of the fact is they're not designed to be hand flown, and they're very, very inefficient if you try to fly them by hand. A lot of times pilots only fly them by hand as needed. For the most part, they like for the aircraft to be controlled by the flight management computer, because the computer does a much better job of flying the plane than the pilot does. The FMC has revolutionized commercial air travel to the point where it is extremely safe. That in conjunction with the efficiency of modern jet engines. You are much safer flying commercially than you are driving to work, all thanks to the flight management computer. Now, like any other computer, the flight management computers, FMCs, need to be updated from time to time with new versions of the FMC software. That usually includes an updated version of all of this stuff. I think it's called AirX. It has, all the waypoint names, all the airport names. So if a new airport comes online, it has to have a new airport code. You got to enter that, and they are always changing SIDs and stars and all that stuff. Well, once a month they have to go in and they have to update the data in the flight management computer. And it's a tool. Pilots are perfectly flying the plane without it. It just requires more effort on their part. Now, there is some controversy in the aviation profession with regards to what the flight management computer is doing to the pilots with regards to their skills. The FMC has done such a good job of controlling planes that pilots are essentially becoming system operators and not pilots. They've gotten so used to, turning the plane over to the computer and taking over from the computer just when they're about to land that they essentially forget how to fly. And if you don't believe me, Google Air France Flight 447. Popular Mechanics has a very good article documenting what happened in the cockpit before that Airbus, I think it was a 340 or 330, before it crashed in the Atlantic. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that these guys were too used to automation and they just couldn't fly. They don't remember how to fly. So some controversy there about the flight management computer. So good to know. And last but not least, FMC is an extremely sophisticated and complex tool. The manuals that go along with these computers run in the hundreds of pages, and in the flight school, depending on what aircraft you're going to get checked out on, you could easily be spending 2 to 3 months learning just the flight management computer. There's a lot of stuff to it. Anyhow, hopefully I answered your questions. My name is Flightsimguy. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.